America first, two words which encapsulate Donald Trump's stance on free trade and globalization. Is this the end to America's world order built on trade, 70 years in the making? I'm Daniel Winter, and this is Made in Germany. It's commonly said that if there's one thing above all else that businesses and investors hate, it's uncertainty. And that's something President Trump's providing in spades. There's a short-term upside to his domestic spending plans, at least for firms with big operations in the US which have assets in dollars. But how hard will Trump's anti-free trade tirade harm everyone else? Well, soon we'll find out, because he's not hanging around. On Monday, Trump made the first step to pull out of the massive TPP trade deal. The president has got European firms anxious too.
A quiet corner of Baden-Württemberg in southern Germany. But appearances are deceiving. The state is an important center of German industry. Baden-Württemberg has more global market leaders than any other German state. Mid-sized companies based here sell their products all over the world. Ziel Abeck, for example, specializes in ventilator units. They're exported to all corners of the planet, including to the US, where they can be found installed in structures from residential buildings to data centers. What will happen if Donald Trump makes good on his protectionist campaign rhetoric? How will that affect German exports to the US? CEO Peter Frenkel is concerned.
The protectionism that Mr. Trump has promised would, of course, have a significant impact on economic activity and presumably also on our business relationship with the U.S. We assume that the punitive tariffs wouldn't apply only to Mexico and China, but would also eventually affect the European market and our activities in North America.
The ventilator blades incorporate elements based on the wings of an owl. The serrated edges reduce air resistance and allow the units to operate more quietly. More than 2/3 of them go to the US. Each unit is more than 1 meter in diameter and is cast out of aluminum. It's a complex manufacturing process.
We developed and implemented the process over years in collaboration with our suppliers.
Ziel Abeck also has a plant in the US, but that facility isn't able to produce all of the different necessary components. Many still have to be imported from Germany. Punitive tariffs would make those parts more expensive. But the company's CEO believes that any protectionist barriers would eventually backfire against the US.
The issue with Mr. Trump is that it's hard to know exactly what his intentions are, but protectionism or tightening borders or instituting higher protective tariffs, that serves only to create a kind of comfort zone for your own economy. Then your companies no longer have to work as hard to be competitive on the global market. Over the mid or long term, that tends to significantly weaken the economy. This has been demonstrated many times throughout history. Protectionism is only useful as a short-term instrument to win over potential voters.
It's still uncertain what trade strategy Donald Trump will actually pursue. For German companies that market to the US, long-term planning has now become more difficult. Hornschuch is another company based in Baden-Württemberg that exports around the world. Their products include artificial leathers used in the automotive industry. This cream-colored artificial leather, for example, is used by Mercedes. Founded more than 100 years ago, today Hornschuch is the global market leader in artificial leather, film, and coated textile production. 1/4 of its profits come from the US. CEO Hans-Hinrich Kruse is taking a wait-and-see approach.
Germany benefits from global free trade. Germany has always sought to remain competitive within a system with few barriers. That's definitely the better course over the long term. For the moment, it's impossible to say whether we'll be dealing with protectionist tendencies or whether actual protectionist policies will be implemented.
Hornschuch also has a production facility in the US. The company invested 40 million euros to build it and created jobs. But activities at the U.S. facility don't require the same level of technological expertise. For example, this durable plastic foil, used in automotive manufacturing, can't be produced there.
The world is interconnected, and that won't change anytime soon. Some industries are meanwhile concentrated in specific regions. Given the huge sums that have been invested in those industries, moving them elsewhere would be difficult.
Donald Trump has injected a new note of unpredictability into the global economy, and German companies will also feel the impact.
Protectionism is nothing new, but it could be about to face a Western renaissance. Used sparingly, it can protect vulnerable industries from the stresses of change. But building a wall around multiple sectors, even entire nations, can also do more harm than good. But what happens if more and more countries jump on the bandwagon and protectionism becomes the norm? Well, let's take a closer look, and to do that, we'd better start with a definition.
What is protectionism? Protectionists want to shield their own country from foreign competition. So they establish barriers. The domestic economy receives preferential treatment. It's being protected. Protectionists often subsidize domestic industries. In the EU, for example, that could be meat or electric vehicles. Tariffs are imposed on products manufactured in foreign countries to curtail imports. That makes foreign products, televisions for example, more expensive and therefore less attractive to consumers. At first, it may seem to work. Domestic manufacturing gets a boost, more workers are hired, and foreign competitors that produce more cheaply are edged out. Bye-bye, free trade. But the products produced at home are more expensive and not always state-of-the-art. Since there's no competition from abroad, innovation begins to lag. Growth also starts to stagnate. Companies produce almost exclusively for the domestic market. Neighboring countries respond by instituting protectionist measures of their own and introduce import tariffs. This is what happened after the 1929 stock market crash in the US. Within just a few years, global trade declined by 2/3. Once one country institutes protectionist measures, others follow in a kind of domino effect. Over time, protectionist countries tend to develop self-sufficient economies. Whether it's carrots, apples, or bananas, whatever doesn't grow at home is no longer sold. Goods become more scarce, and growth suffers. And what about the protectionists? They're left with a mountain of debt. Subsidies are expensive. History has shown that a wave of protectionism is often followed by a financial crisis and even government default. That's usually followed by renewed support for free trade.
And here with me to talk Trump and plenty more besides is Daniela Schwarzer, the director of the German Council on Foreign Relations. So Daniela, thank you very much for coming to see us here. What is Trump's plan to shake up trade, and can it actually work out in America's favour?
Well, we really don't know what his plan is today. We have heard a lot about his protectionist ideas. We have heard that he wants to give up certain trade agreements. The first concrete thing we know is that he wants to, or he has said he withdraws from the Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement. But other than that, we have seen him exert pressure on certain companies to either not relocate their production from the United States or actually bring it back to the United States. But we do not know whether he really wants to run a fully-fledged protectionist trade war agenda for the United States.
Okay, well, you mentioned trade wars there. Plenty of analysts are saying that there could be a new trade war with China on the horizon. Now, is that realistic? And if so, what form could that take?
It would be hugely costly for the United States, frankly. That's why I believe he wouldn't go as far as that. A trade war basically means one side takes hugely protectionist measures like very high tariffs, really preventing Chinese-produced goods from coming into the United States. But first of all, he would have to expect that China retaliates and decides to sanction US goods in the same way. And then he also has to take into account that China has other means to hurt the United States. One thing is, for instance, that a lot of Chinese money goes into, for instance, state bonds. So actually, China owns a lot of American debt. So they have other means to really exert serious pressure on the United States. And just one other element why I think this is hugely costly for the United States. If Chinese goods become more expensive in the United States, Trump's voters, some of which aren't well off, they will feel immediately that their life becomes far more expensive.
OK, and so we've had trade wars before throughout history, opium, oil, even tea. But is this a brand new form of trade war? Because we have massive countries, superpowers involved, China and the US. Will this be different from anything we've ever seen before?
Well, we don't know today whether he goes for real trade war. I think he will really focus more on very symbolic measures where he can actually make a case that his protectionist idea has actually produced jobs in the United States or has even made life cheaper for the citizens of the United States. But a trade war would mean serious harm. It's very costly in the medium term. And at some point, as we've seen in the small film we just saw, it will actually be undone again and he will be proven wrong with his promises. So I don't believe we will see something similar to what we've seen in the past. OK, and briefly, what can we do, what can firms do, let's say, to keep thriving in this environment, in an isolationist environment? Well, first of all, what we heard in the other film you showed is that CEOs at this point don't really know what's going to happen. So they have to look at all kinds of scenarios. They simply don't know whether their specific goods, which they have been importing to the United States, will have to live with higher tariffs. The German export model is one that puts emphasis on, first of all, price competitiveness, but also the high quality of their goods. So I do believe some of our segments will actually work despite tariffs that may possibly be improved.
All right, Daniela Schwarzer, we'll get back to you in just a moment. Well, it seems uncertainty will reign for the time being. German companies, though, have already had a taste of Trump's anger. Europe's strongest economy wields far too great an influence when it comes to trade. And that's not just the opinion of the US, but many countries in the European Union, too.
The new U.S. president is probably none too pleased that Germany exports a lot more than it imports and has done so for decades. In 2016, Germany's trade surplus equaled 7.7% of the country's GDP. In Trump's world, one country's surplus equals another country's deficits, and deficits mean less production, slower economic activity, and job loss in those countries. Consider trade between Germany and the United States. German exports to the U.S. keep growing year on year, especially machines, cars, and pharmaceuticals. Sales in the other direction are worth just half as much. Between January and November last year, Germany sold 56 billion euros more to the U.S. than it bought. That makes the U.S. Germany's biggest export market. About 1 million German jobs are estimated to depend on it. The European Union doesn't like the trade surplus either. EU agreements allow for a maximum of just 6% of GDP. In fact, one of the union's governing bodies, the EU Commission, should begin proceedings against Germany to stop it. But the Commission doesn't want to antagonize Germany and has delayed so far. And Germany isn't taking steps to reduce the surplus. On the contrary, manufacturers are balking at renewed employee wage demands so that German companies remain competitive in international markets. Businesses and manufacturers have no intention of reducing exports. Economic pressure to maintain a trade surplus is strong, given that Germany offers a wide range of goods that are in demand worldwide. At the same time, Germany is doing nothing to increase imports. Compared to other countries, the government is not investing much in infrastructure. Experience shows that more investment would boost imports and reduce surplus. None of this interests the new U.S. president. Trump wants to force German companies like BMW to produce their products in the U.S. if they want to continue to sell there.
And to take a closer look on this, Daniela Schwarzer is still with us. So, Daniela, Germany is too powerful when it comes to exports. Do you agree?
I don't agree, actually. I mean, we have a specific problem within Europe, and in particular within the Eurozone, where Germany runs a huge trade surplus and other countries are in a permanent deficit. So we have to think about how we rebalance the euro area, and Germany can contribute to that more strongly than it has in the past. But if you look at the numbers in detail, you see that a large share of Germany's trade surplus actually goes to other countries than the EU ones. The US have become Germany's largest trading partner. So we have to look in a very nuanced way. We have to worry about rebalancing the Eurozone, that is true. But if we argue that Germany's economy should be less competitive, that would also mean in global terms. And that would then, in the end, harm Europe more than it would help, actually.
OK, so we've looked at the economic level. But if we zoom in now on the businesses, how are they going to have to adapt to this new world order, this new way of doing business?
Well, if protectionism is on the rise, this would obviously be a problem, not only for Germany's export economy, but for Europe's export economy and even in other countries, of course. So obviously, companies will have to factor in the possibility of tariffs being imposed on their goods, but also the government has to really prepare to enter negotiations and make their point very clearly that Germany and Europe sticks to a liberal trade order, that the World Trade Organization continues to have its role to play, because there's a real political risk that Donald Trump actually undermines the liberal economic order we have in the world today.
OK, and getting away from Trump just a little bit, there are other political upheavals going on within Europe. So we've seen Brexit, for example, upcoming elections with populists becoming ever more popular, it seems. So, and that's along with all of the trade troubles that we've heard about. So are we seeing already a sign that this is affecting businesses with the uncertainty? And if not, will it?
Well, we definitely live in a time of huge uncertainty, and you mentioned Brexit. That is, of course, a huge question. And it goes further because there's a real risk that not only the UK may leave the EU, but that the single market may actually, I'm not saying unraveling, but that other countries may actually doubt that it's good for them to stay in Europe's single market. So policymakers, in my view, have a very important political task these days, and to actually find ways to compensate the losers of globalization and free trade in a better way than they used to do, and actually make it clear to people that the liberal economic order that we have thrived in for decades is still a good model, but it needs to be rebalanced by more social policy.
OK, and I'd like to pick up that last point as well. The populists promise new job creation, but we're also seeing increasing automation. How are these two things compatible, and can the populists fulfil their promise?
They will have a very hard time in fulfilling their promise of creating more jobs. First of all, because, in my view, protectionism will only lead to very short-term gains and won't create more jobs in the medium and long run. And then we have this parallel development that automation will replace jobs in any case. So there is a big risk, if pressure rises on companies through protectionist measures, that this automation process actually proceeds more quickly.
Right, Daniela Schwarzer from the German Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Those calling to protect certain industries often cite job losses as a reason. Hard-working people fired from their jobs simply because their economic tides have changed. It's something keenly felt in France right now. Our reporter Lisa Lewis investigates the impact on France's very own Rust Belt.
Last autumn, 200 workers lost their jobs here in Beautor, northern France, when their steel plant closed. Its owner, the Russian steelmaker NLMK, had wanted to sell it, but couldn't find a buyer. For more than a century, the plant had been a pillar of the local economy. The workers say they can't understand why the government did nothing to prevent the closure.
The authorities should protect our industries, especially in small towns and rural regions. We were a really good team. In Belgium, the regional government bought 49% of an NLMK plant. Why does the Belgian state do it and the French state doesn't?
Many of the former steelworkers are disappointed not only by the government, but also by the mainstream political parties. The first round of the French presidential election is to be held on the 23rd of April.
Neither the left nor the right have done anything for us. I'm going to vote for the National Front. At least they'll send all the foreign workers home. Then we'll get their jobs. Lots of foreigners have been taking our jobs. We French people should have priority.
Many companies in this part of northern France have closed down over the past few decades. The unemployment rate in some towns is 16% or higher. People here feel abandoned, left high and dry. Many find the arguments, or the slogans, of the far-right National Front appealing. 5 mayors in the region represent the party. One of them is Franck Briffaut in Villers-Cotterêts.
We want tariffs to put an end to unfair competition from abroad. And the euro is bad for us. We can't boost exports by having a weaker currency, only by depressing wages.
He sounds rather like Donald Trump. The new US president also wants to impose tariffs on imports to the United States.
I think he's got the right idea. Of course, the Americans want to act in their own interest, but they're asking the right questions, and others will follow suit. What we're witnessing is the end of a certain economic model that's been sold to us in such a dogmatic manner.
Briffaut denies that protectionist measures could harm French firms, for example, if they have to pay more for imports. He believes the risks of an open economy and of an open society are greater.
It's dangerous to admit 300,000 foreigners every year. They don't want to integrate. We have to put an end to this political wishful thinking that says we can all just hold hands and get along. That's not the way the world works.
People here want to see Trump-style protectionism enforced in France, too. Mayor Briffaut says many want to see change, including the local estate agents, for example.
Many of our clients are having a hard time keeping their businesses running in the face of tough competition from Eastern Europe, where pay is much lower. That hits small companies especially hard. Mr. Trump is on the right track when he says he wants to see jobs at the local and national level. We saw how he dealt with the car makers. The aim is to bring jobs back home.
The sawmill at the edge of town is run by Éric Charpentier. He says French companies need some degree of protection, including his own. It's now competing with companies as far away as China, which buy up lots of timber from France. He says the situation is not sustainable.
We need a steady supply of raw materials. Otherwise, our factory will grind to a halt. The government should ensure that French timber remains in France, so that our lumber and woodworking industry can survive.
Charpentier says the European Union needs to do its part as well to protect European industries.
The EU should take tougher measures to protect the economy with respect to imports and exports. It could learn a lesson or two from China, and now from the US as well.
It's too late to revive the steel plant in Beautort. Other jobs in the area are hard to find. Of the 200 who have lost their livelihoods, only 30 have so far found a new job.
We meet and try to cheer each other up, especially when somebody is feeling really desperate and is having a particularly lousy day. We're there for each other, even though NLMK isn't there for us anymore.
They're not giving up without a fight. They're filing suit, demanding a better severance package. Some spent their entire working life at the plant.
And sadly, it's time to wrap things up for now, but join us next week when we'll once again focus on protectionism, this time in Europe and particularly in Britain. Prime Minister Theresa May has made it clear that her government wants a clean break with Europe. But people who work in the creative industries in London are totally against a hard Brexit. They're mobilising in favour of open borders and raising their voices against protectionism and all it stands for. Many businesses in Britain, on the other hand, seem to be adopting a pragmatic approach to the new circumstances. Some think the nation's export sector will profit from a weaker pound and are hoping to strike a quick trade deal with the new US president. And that's all for now. Thanks for joining us here on Made in Germany from me and all the crew here in Berlin. Thank you for watching and see you next time.